I'm seeing. So
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started because it is 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I want to make sure that we are keeping to our time and valuing the time of the wonderful guest that has joined us today for this conversation. Dr. Uche Anizor is the author of the book Overcoming Apathy, Gospel Hope for Those Who Struggle to Care. And it won the 2023 Christianity Today Book of the Year Award, which means that it's been on my list for a really long time, but I actually didn't get read till like closer to the end of 2023. And immediately, I mean, I knew I wanted to read it because I was pretty sure it was about acedia. And I have thought so much about acedia. I think this has been sort of one of the most important kind of learnings that I would say over the last maybe 3 years, especially since the pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking it with Uche. And hopefully, if you're joining us, you can offer up your own questions too. And I'm joined by Abby Murish as well, who's co-conspirator here at A Habit Called Faith. And so she's going to be kind of managing the chat. So I will probably not be looking at the chat, but feel free to put anything in there, and Abby will be taking any questions that you want to ask, and we're going to try to work those into the conversation. That is my long introduction to say hello, Uche.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Before we started recording this call, I was, of course, noticing your Canadian flag, and you said to me, no, that's incidental. I didn't put it there just for you. But we have a Toronto connection. So why don't you talk a little bit about your background?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in Toronto, but I was born in Nigeria. So I was born in Nigeria. My family moved to the US when I was really, really young. And we spent 2 or 3 years in Buffalo, New York. And so I was a Buffalonian for a little bit. And then we eventually migrated a little further north into Toronto. And so I spent all my primary and secondary schooling was in Canada. College was in Canada as well. After graduating college, I joined staff with Campus Crusade for Christ, now known as Cru globally, I guess. And after I left Cru staff, I came back to the U.S. for seminary and have been in the U.S. since then. So right now I'm in Southern California, Biola University.
Do you prefer the climate of Southern California to either Buffalo or Toronto?
Is that a real question?
It kind of is, because I think there are people who might prefer Toronto. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's the number one thing that keeps me never really pondering seriously leaving Southern California. I'd love to be back in Canada one day, but every time I think about it, I'm like, whew, that's a lot of winter. That's a whole lot of winter. Yeah.
That's a lot of winter. Well, as I was sharing with you, we live in Cincinnati now, and we've only been here for a year and a half, and Cincinnati is not Southern California, but it's also not Toronto.
Yeah, it's mild. Yeah.
So you kind of get used to it. I hate to say that, but
yep.
God bless everyone who's joining this call or watching it later who is from Toronto and Canada. We love you. Well, I am going to just kind of ask you the question that I think probably a lot of people ask you early in an interview is just, the motivation for writing your book, Overcoming Apathy. Like, was this something that I was actually very curious? I mean, I'm assuming it was something that for you was a personal learning, maybe something you were noticing in your students. I was also curious whether or not it was connected at all to your academic work.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it has no connection to any prior academic work, nor is it connecting to future academic work. It was sort of an isolated project that had been on my mind for a number of years. And so you're right, it was a personal sort of quest project where I was trying in my 20s when I was on staff with Campus Crusade. I was trying in my 20s to make sense of the sort of tension I felt of I know I'm a Christian and I'm following Jesus and I'm trying to go hard after following Jesus, but I also find myself just having a hard time getting up for the things that are supposed to be sort of definitive of my life, especially at that time when my life was all about evangelism, discipleship, mission, when I was on staff with Cru. But there'd be some days, especially in my mid 20s, where I just couldn't get up for it, and that always sort of puzzled me. And so I just filed that away and said, okay, one day I'm gonna think about this some more. And then fast forward many, many years, I'm mentoring students as a faculty member here. I've had the history of mentoring students with Crew, and I'm butting up against the same sort of dynamic. These guys who are legitimate, honest, sincere Christians who, when you ask, okay, so talk to me about your church involvement or your church attendance or your reading of scripture or your prayer life or whatever, it would always be the same, not always, it would regularly be the same kind of answer of like, I just really can't get up for this. I'm just not that interested. But they were Christians, and I wasn't doubting their Christian faith, but there was something amiss there. And so I said, okay, I think sometime in the next few years, I'm going to try to like write something that forces me to think more carefully about what's going on in our souls, that's sort of provoking this sort of apathetic response to the things of the faith.
Hmm. I'd be curious to know whether or not do you feel like there's been an increase in apathy, acedia? I'm curious actually also to know whether or not you say acedia or acedia.
I have literally no idea. So I've heard like 4 different ways of pronouncing it, and so I'm just gonna go with acedia because it seems like
Okay,
the most natural way to say it.
that's what I say too.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I
good.
like it. I like it. Yeah.
Okay,
So
perfect.
we'll go with that. Sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, so the question is, compared to you yourself as an undergraduate and then as a professor of undergraduates, I mean, I don't know how much elapsed time there was, but do you feel that there was a rise? Like we're seeing an increase in acedia?
Yeah, I want to say yes, but I'm not convinced of my yes.
Mm,
So I'm thinking back into the early 2000s, and I'm working with undergraduate students. I'm still only in my mid 20s, but I'm working with undergraduate students, and I'd ask the same kinds of questions about their faith, about their soul, and these kinds of things, and I would get the same answers. The distractions were different, and the kinds of things that might have been front and center as distractions were maybe different than they are now. So now we always attribute it to the common technological things like smartphones or whatever. But back then it was things like just hanging out with my dorm mates or my housemates till like 3 in the morning. I'm playing full what's that video game, the one Grand Theft Auto, till like ridiculous times in the morning. And so our hearts are always prone to find the things that will distract. And so it's hard for me to say whether quantitatively, like there are more people who struggle with apathy now than back then. Maybe that's the case, but I see it as there's a common feature of 20 something, 30 something, 40 something Christian faith, to be honest.
mm. I mean, I've just always wondered about the technological environment, just the frictionless way that we're moving through the world. It just
Yeah,
seems that it would have to form in us like the distaste,
yeah,
for effort. I mean, that's what I've just kind of noticed in myself.
yeah.
But like you said, I mean, whether or not we have quantitative data about it, we know it's a problem and we know it's a problem of the human heart. So why don't we
Mhm.
just start by like defining terms here? Why don't you tell us how you're defining it in the book? And I'm also particularly interested in why you talked about apathy. You named it as apathy rather than acedia. And maybe that was a
Uh-huh.
publishing decision. So
Yeah,
tell us
for
how you're
sure.
defining it and why you chose apathy.
Yeah, so I'm not a clinician, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. So I try to use a term that I think people can more or less identify with, right? So if I said my book is called Overcoming Acedia, I would have no one read my book. And so I like people reading my book if I'm going to write it. So I chose apathy, but the kind of apathy that I was focusing in on wasn't just apathy towards anything and everything. It was apathy towards the spiritual life or the things of God. And so the way that I'm defining it in the book is apathy is a prolonged sort of dampening of motivation, a dampening of effort, a dampening of energy um, toward the things of God or towards the things that are meant to make us flourish and others flourish.
Mm.
And so I do define it as a sinful tendency that sometimes fleshes itself out in terms of like a lack of love or a restlessness or a listlessness, these kinds of things. But if I was to put it in summary, it's basically just a prolonged period of not really being into the things that I probably should be into as a
Hmm.
Christian.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The things you might say you're committed to and actually really value.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But you can't find yourself getting up for them. And so that to me is the mystifying dimension. I have no doubt in my mind that the people who are saying to me, I have a hard time reading my Bible, going to church, and all these kinds of things. In their heart of hearts, I think they value them, or they at least can see that there is value to them in some way, shape, or form. But there's something else going on in the soul that's hindering their engagement with those things.
Mm. I really was appreciating how you talked about it as care adrift. Does that drive actually the image, the cover image?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely does. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful. I don't have a copy, like a hard copy of your book, because I have it, from your publicist, but this wonderful, just kind of, it's just this green background, right? And then this little
both.
boat,
Yeah,
like a little like skiff
yeah,
in the
yeah,
middle of this ocean, no paddles, no, oars or anything like that. So
yeah.
this idea of like acedia, apathy being care adrift or care misplaced. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So again, in my observations of folks and the kinds of things that they were apathetic towards, I noticed that they weren't apathetic towards everything, and so there might be certain things that they find themselves really passionate about. So the very same person who's saying to me, I have a hard time reading my Bible, is pretty passionate about playing Xbox for 3.5 hours, right? And if you sat to engage them in a conversation about how do you get past this level on Xbox, they would give you a mouth, an earful of ideas, and they'd be passionate about it. And so I'm not convinced that apathy is just I don't care about everything. I think it's more about misplacing our cares and something driving that misplacement of our cares, rather
Mhm.
than a full scale caring about nothing.
Do you think then that as human beings, we have a finite capacity for caring? I mean, just a limited kind of care capacity or resources.
I think we do, and I think this might be where some of the technological conversation sort of dovetails a little bit. I think because we have access to so many things to care about, we have a lot of access to all the cares of the world, so to speak. We can often find ourselves exhausted by the pressure, and maybe it's an appropriate pressure, but the pressure to care. Whereas we only have a limited amount of energy, and in fact, we only have a limited, for lack of a better term, scope, or a limited range of things that we can realistically be responsible for. And so there is a sense in which, yeah, we are called to care about all people everywhere and all things, but we're really called to care about the things that are closer, more local, for lack of a better term.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it it just reminds me of just how often people tend, or social media drives us often to care about the things that are least, central to our lives sometimes, the things that are most distant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've just kind of noticed that. But so much to talk about. I want you to, one of the things I think that was really interesting in your book that I haven't seen elsewhere, is just talking about the causes of apathy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wondered if you could kind of go through that list, if you remember. If you don't remember, I have it here because I know what it's like to, you've probably done this so many times that you are very good at remembering the list.
But I haven't done it in months and months and months, and so
Oh,
I
okay,
jot
good.
I jotted down some notes, and so
Okay,
this is
good.
this is going to have a somewhat of a scripted element to it, because I needed to remember the things that I wrote many moons ago. And so, all right, so 7 causes. All of these causes, or this group of causes, I don't want any of my readers to assume that I think this is sort of like an exhaustive list of causes. This is just my way of sort of giving a mirror, a way of sort of reflecting back to you what might be some possible things going on in your soul that might be contributing to sort of apathetic disposition. So let me name the 7 and sort of briefly talk about them. Doubt. So I talk about doubt because, and I put doubt as number 1 because that's the one that's tripped me up probably more than any other cause of apathy in my own life. And so a lot of these causes are my own sort of self-diagnosis. And so doubt, doubting whether God is real, whether God is
Mm.
personal, whether God actually answers prayers, whether growth is actually possible, these different kinds of things. And so if I doubt that God is real and answering prayer and moving me forward and is present in my life, why, if I'm doubting that, why in the world would I engage in any meaningful sense with it. And so doubt leads to a common theme in the book, which is a loss of meaning. If God is not there, if God is silent, then my life ceases to have the kind of meaning that motivates action, right? So doubt. Grief. I talk about grief, not in the sort of extreme sense of losing a person per se, but the losses that we experience in life. They force us to have to cope with them in some way, shape, or form. And I think, along with something more severe like depression, I think apathy is a coping mechanism. How do I cope with the feeling of loss, of unprocessed loss? Oftentimes, it's just to shut down and to shut down emotionally. And I think that's just a numbing, which is maybe akin to apathy. Third cause is what I call triviality. And by triviality, I'm simply referring to our being inundated by things that are relatively just meaningless constantly, right? So I'm not a social media person, so my inundation level is a lot less. But I even choose. I wake up in the morning and I'll open my phone and I'll go to articles that are like less than a page, half page long. They're not well written, and they're talking about some trivial thing about the soccer team that I love or whatever, right? And my whole day is filled with the trivial. Now, I know that the trivial things are trivial, but what ends up happening oftentimes in our lives is that the trivial gets mixed in with the meaningful to the point where we're so overloaded with content, for lack of a better term, that we get numb to even the meaningful things. We treat them sort of democratically. What else do I have here? Feelings of inadequacy. And all I have in mind here is that sense that some of us have in our lives where we feel like we can't actually make meaningful change in the world, in other people's lives, and especially in our own lives. And so if I feel like I can't make a meaningful change, or if I'm insignificant, then my response, or my default response, is going to be, well, why bother then? Right? And so sometimes this can happen with those who experience compassion fatigue. I'm so overwhelmed by the cares of the world, and I need to love and love and love to the point where you start to realize I can't fix the world. And if I can't fix the world, why bother, right? And so that's the sort of feelings of inadequacy, excuse me. Lack of discipline. This is sort of me just saying, hey, sometimes our lack of passion for Jesus and for the things of God is not really that mystifying. It's if I don't invest in those things. So, for instance, if I find myself, I watch 10 hours of Netflix, mix that in with a bunch of phone time, mix that in with just thinking about sports and talking about sports all day, all things that are fine, they're morally sort of neutral. But if my whole day is that multiplied by 7 days, multiplied by 52 weeks, there's a sense in which I should not be surprised that I have not invested in the things of the Spirit, so to speak. I've not sought to set my mind on the things of the Spirit. And so it should not be a surprise when my mind and my heart are not really inclined towards the things of the Spirit. The math isn't that complicated. And so it's me just trying to say a lack of discipline or spiritual discipline in our lives could very well just be the reason. And no more mysteries are needed. No more psychological work is needed. It's just kind of get your stuff together and sort of like press into being disciplined, even in small incremental ways. Two more. I'm not sure if you wanted all seven, but I'm going to give you the last two here.
I do.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. All right, so then I have the category of fragility, but by that I simply mean fear. It's a lack of resilience. It's a fear of embracing things that might be hard, whether they're sort of like missional things or whether they're just emotional things or whatever they might be. It's a fear of engaging those things. And so what ends up happening is that if we fear engaging a certain thing, then we end up pulling away from it. And the way the law of these things works is the more I pull away from something or someone, the less I start to care about them. Yes. So proximity produces concern and care, but distance produces apathy, I think. And so fragility, fear, the distancing from hard things. And then the last thing is just a lack of purpose. a sense of here's what I'm about, here's what life is about, here's what God is calling me to, generically as a Christian, but specifically as a person. And when we lose touch with that sense of purpose, it's back down to that issue of meaning. If I don't have a sense of purpose, then what are my days about? What how are my individual these actions, the mundane things I do in the day, how are they meaningful if they're not connected to some sense of purpose? And I think a lot of us just sort of lose sight of that. And so those are the 7 causes I identify. I'm sure I could have identified another 10, but those are the ones I sort of zeroed in on.
Hmm. Well, I definitely, I would definitely say there were surprises in that list for me. I was like, oh, doubt. Of course, of course it makes sense that if you doubt if God can be involved or that you yourself can grow, that spiritual transformation can actually produce like progress,
Yeah.
then you're not going to lean toward that. Um, in the book, you're obviously the whole subtitle is Gospel Hope for Those Who Struggle to Care. And I think one of the tensions when we're talking about acedia and apathy is that like effort is going to be involved to overcome it. And you've named that, you've talked about leaning toward things rather than leaning away from them because distance is going to produce apathy and proximity is going to produce care. Even discipline. Like I was thinking about, gosh, there's this idea of like apathy is a lack of discipline, like a lack of like, lacking the motivation to do anything, but then the answer being to do something,
Hmm.
to take up discipline in order to become industrious, like
Hmm. Yeah.
to grow that character. So
Yeah.
speak to somebody who is struggling with, wait, grace, right? For by grace we've been saved through faith. What do you say to people? Because I do hear this a lot, people who are
Hmm.
like, I'm just exhausted. Don't tell me one more thing to do in
Yeah.
my spiritual life. I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. And they often feel that you're offering an answer that feels like just more to dos.
Yeah.
What do you say to that person?
That's good. Yeah. So I would agree with the person that, in a very general way, it's correct to say we are saved by grace. And that's a truism for Christians. But when we talk about grace, the question is what is grace there for, so to speak, right? So is grace simply there to sort of provide the rescue and the pass, so to speak, in terms of having to put forward effort? Or as the Christian tradition has understood grace is also this sort of gift, this gift of empowerment to carry out the very things that God has called us to do. And so it's by grace that we're saved, and that it's God's unmerited favor, but it's also God's empowerment to carry out what we're called to carry out as His creatures. And so then to the question of, am I adding or are we adding things to do? I think for the person that feels overwhelmed, they may very well simply be overwhelmed, and they very well may be conceiving of their Christian life as, all right, here's the checklist of 17 things I need to do to sort of be true to Jesus and be growing as a Christian. And that may simply be too many things, right? And so I would still say that grace propels us to make an effort. Even yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone about 2 Peter 1, where Peter talks about God has given us everything we need to live a godly life in Christ Jesus. But then it says, therefore, or in light of this, or for this reason, make every effort to add to your faith, right? And so then he sees both things happening at the same time. God has given us everything we need, and Peter's not lying, and God's not lying. And so then, if that's true, then we can make effort, and effort is not sort of like the diametric opposite of grace. And so then, in some way, we have to figure out what does it look like to put forward an effort, but to put forward an effort as a limited human being who recognizes that I can't put forward an effort in 15 areas, but I can put forward an effort in 4 areas. And I'm just going to press into these and trust that God can move my heart incrementally toward Him, rather than viewing our Christian faith in terms of like success in completing a number of sort of spiritual tasks.
Hmm. What do you say to the person? I'm not going to take the undergraduate as an example because I don't think that that is generally my readership.
Yeah.
But let's say, you have that middle-aged person in your congregation and they say to you, I'm just spiritually dry. I don't know. It's been years since I've felt any sense of intimacy with Christ. Don't tell me to read my Bible. Like I've kind of done that. I've done the Bible reading plan. What do you say to them? What practices and habits do you commend to them? Or maybe you kind of veer away from that. What efforts, I suppose, do you commend to that person?
Yeah. So for that person, I would want to ask a number of questions before I commend anything, if I'm being honest, right? So the
Yeah.
first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to ask, what do you mean by feeling less intimacy with Jesus? Like, what does that mean? Because that could very well simply mean the spirituality that I had in my 20s feels different than my spirituality in my 40s, and I think for most people, if we're being honest, that is just going to be the case. Because a number of intervening things have happened since you were 22 and red hot and had tons of time on your hands and can go to every single spiritual event, and you had oodles of time to reflect and journal and do all the things you wanted to do, versus now you have 3 kids and you got
You
to
don't
shuttle them off.
sleep.
You don't sleep anymore and you shuttle them off to things, and you have jobs and mortgages and things that are real, that sort of reform and reshape what zeal might look like for us. Zeal starts to look more like faithfulness in the plodding than
Oh,
it does passion, so to speak, in that sort of like 20 something sort of sense. And so I want to diagnose, what do you mean by the lack of intimacy, lack of passion, and then I'd want to ask about, um, talk to me about the character of your Bible reading. Talk to me about the character and shape of your prayer life. Because I'm never going to let anyone off the hook in terms of like the Bible part and the prayer part. However, what I'm going to say to them is like, there are ways of approaching these things that we have to be aware sometimes that we've grown numb to particular ways of engaging it, and we may need to engage it differently, right? So you might need to go through a season of 2 3 years of just listening to the audio Bible, or shifting your translation, or not worrying about reading the Bible in a year, but really fixating on certain portions of scripture that are resonating with you. You do whatever you can to sort of stay in the game, um, without feeling like there's some external body that is imposing upon you a way of engaging with scripture, or a way of prayer, or a way of church involvement. There is no external body and no objective way of doing so, but we we're called to engage in some way, shape, or form with God through His Word, with God in connection through prayer, and all these sort of Christian basics. And so, I know that's not the exact answer you were looking for in terms of like practices, specific practices, but I'd want to understand what's behind the question and how they're conceiving their spiritual life.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you talk a lot about the role of community. I mean, I think that's very apparent in the, sort of looking forward. How do you fight and resist acedia? So why don't you just speak to habits and practices that we take up in community?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, the Christian community piece has probably been the most helpful thing for me in dealing with the things that cause like apathy in me, right? So doubt. When I'm dealing with doubt, one of the most helpful things I've done, and it was hard for me to do this, was basically owning it to a colleague who's happened to be a close friend of mine who also goes to my church, but owning it to this fellow colleague that like, I am a theologian and I doubt sometimes that God exists, or
Mm.
or I doubt that like there's something beyond this life, and that just trips me up. And so I need you to ask me about this. I need you to pray for me about this. And so just being able to be open and honest and receive prayer for these things that prevent me from engaging with God passionately. I think also in terms of community, I think I mentioned this in the book, that um, we need community of varying types of people, and one type of person we need to be engaged with is someone who is not a commiserator, but someone
Mm.
who is further along than us, or someone that we can perceive is displaying a kind of zeal that we are attracted to. And they can be a peer, or they can be someone older, or whatever. But being in community with people that, for lack of a better term, are better than you, and I don't mean better, but you know what I mean, like people who are calling you forward or calling you higher, rather than what we oftentimes find ourselves doing is we think community really means it only means vulnerability, and vulnerability only means talking about our garbage, or talking about all the things that bring us down as people. And and there's a place for that. But I think as we try to overcome these sort of propensities in our heart towards apathy, I think we need to like be very deliberate about making sure that we have a certain kind of community. Not this doesn't mean excluding people who are struggling. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, knowing that we're always going to be amidst people that are struggling, also finding people, spiritual friends who can move us forward. And I think one of the main things in community is the opportunity to serve other people. And yeah, I think one of the hard things with apathy is that apathy is so isolating. You feel like you're so alone. Your life shrinks. Everything seems to be meaningless, and all this kind of stuff. And what happens when you serve other people? You're called out of yourself, and you're called to plug in to the meaningfulness of other people's lives, and their story, and their hurts, and their needs, and their concerns. And that's just a super helpful thing for keeping us out of this sort of, like, for lack of a better term, self-absorbed posture of apathy that we can sometimes find ourselves locked into. I'll stop there. Yeah.
That was wonderful. I think it was really helpful for you to talk about zeal. I have been thinking about zeal. I know a couple of people right now that I would describe as very zealous, and exactly the kind of people that you're describing, like that. Just to watch their lives, like, spurs me on toward love and good deeds.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even have to say anything, I'm
Yep.
just kind of watching. And
Yep.
actually, I think that's probably been true all of my Christian life. I can think about before I was really even a Christian, raised in a Christian home, but a very rebellious teenager, and just kind of watching some people, and like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, actually, they take this very seriously. Actually, this
Yeah.
really matters to them. I would love to hear you. And you said, I think you said the phrase plodding faithfulness. Is that how you described
Yeah.
zeal in your 40s?
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
thanks be to God. Imagine that zeal can just be plodding faithfulness. Because one of the questions that I was wrestling with, even in myself, as in conversation and just in life and ministry, calling people toward a zealous life, how does that not just look like American or North American busyness? Like, okay, here's how you can be zealous. You
Mm-hmm.
can do, fill your calendar with these things and take up these habits and practices. And yeah, what would you say to just about the distinction between zeal and just activity?
Mm-hmm.
Can I add a
Yeah.
layer to that question?
Please.
Sure.
Also, how along with that, how do we then view like the little things that we're doing that feel so meager in building God's kingdom, but to the outside world they would not look zealous. It's the taking the meal to the new mom. I have very limited capacity for the big things, and then I look at some of my peers who are working in health clinics in major cities serving underserved populations.
Mm-hmm.
They look more zealous to me
Mm-hmm.
than I
Mm-hmm.
feel. And so
Yeah.
how do we account for those differences too without creating kind of this new an artificial metric for measuring someone's godliness and life of faith?
Yeah. That's a brilliant question. Yeah. So I had a conversation with one of my former students about this today. Where we were talking about, so how do we measure the what's the word, the impact, or the sort of, like, from the God's eye perspective, the value of your two options: me standing in front of 50 students and teaching them theology, versus the person who's ringing out my order at the grocery store. Both Christians, right? Both are called to something. Now, when I stand before God, and when the cashier stands before God. Um, all things being equal, if we're both approaching our task, the thing that we're called to do in the day to day, if we're approaching it with a Godward perspective, where we're seeking to do this unto God, in God's math, is my teaching theology of more overarching heavenly perspective value than the grocery clerk? I'm not sure how to answer that question. I'm doubtful that my teaching theology is more valuable. I can see the linear connection in terms of, like, I'm teaching people about Jesus or about God. They're taking that and they're growing and they're understanding God, and that's always great. Right, I get that, but I think God's measurement is faithfulness. And so all of our stations and our callings are just so different. And 90 whatever percent of the world can't do what I do for a living. And so then what I do for a living cannot be the normative sort of, or any remotely normative measure for, like, what faithful, what impact or kingdom impact looks like, for the people who are living in the majority world, who just go to work. And they'll work in a field, they'll work in a factory, they'll do whatever they can to support their lot and support their families. If they're doing that unto God, that is faithful and valuable, and they'll receive God's commendation when he says, well done, good and faithful servant. So then back to the question, what does zeal look like? Zeal looks like being alive and being awake to what it is that God has called you to do, and engaging in that wholeheartedly. Whatever that is.
I hope I'm gonna have to rewatch that just to capture that phrase. Being alive and awake to whatever God's called you to. Is that how you said it?
Yeah.
It's wonderful and rich spiritual imagery. You know, we have and I think asleep. There are reasons why we have the imagery of sleepiness in scripture, right? Versus being awake. Like, I feel like acedia is this kind of like spiritual torpor, or like the sluggishness. I actually, to be honest, I would often feel it when we drive back into Toronto. I don't know. We don't have to go down a Toronto road, but I feel like sometimes you're just in certain places where you just feel just a spiritual kind of heaviness. And I think that I feel it in myself. You know, I feel a drowsiness, a kind of like I can't rouse myself to care about that, especially after COVID, you know, like where we sort of lost a lot of our rhythms and routines. I want you to just address the role of emotion in this kind of caring. I don't remember. I didn't actually write down specifically what you said in your book, but I wondered, are we guilty of apathy if we don't feel like we care, even if we maintain involvement in something?
Yeah.
And I would just say, you know, I'll give an example from my own life. You know, I moved to Cincinnati to be just to care for my mom who has Alzheimer's. And there are so many times I don't want to show up for that. Like, I don't want to show up for it. And if I were to just kind of like scrutinize and examine my own heart, I would say, I don't care. You know, I feel a deep resistance to caring. And yet I do show up for the tasks. So what do I need to learn and understand?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think in an ideal universe, all of our affections and emotions would align perfectly with all the tasks that we carry out for God. You know, all the sort of spiritual tasks, or loving our neighbor and whatnot. Our hearts would perfectly align. Like, we'd be overflowing with love, and then we'd carry it out, and that would just be the regular rhythm of our lives. And that's just not the rhythm of our lives, right? That's just not how our lives work. And so, while not letting our emotions off the hook in any area, whether we're talking apathy or joy or whatever it is, without letting our emotions off the hook, we also need to recognize that when I'm carrying out an act, like, you know, loving my mom, or serving my neighbor, I'm enacting love. Now, I may not have this sort of like bubbling over, like, you know, feeling of like, I'm just loving this person so much right now. That may not be the case, right? However, the act itself is love, and then my responsibility is to pray that God enable my emotional world and my affections to align with like the action that is itself virtuous
Yeah.
and is a display of love.
Mhm.
And so then when it comes to apathy, so you may not care, or you may not be feeling a lot of care towards doing whatever task it is in the moment, but there's a deeper motivation that still propels you to carry out the action. And
Mm.
so it's not that sort of like upper surface level of love that is right, easily readable, but it's something deeper than that. It's a love for the good, it's a love for God, it's a love for the person, and that still drives you to carry out the action, even though you're not like feeling it and emoting it, right? And so then you ask, is the person apathetic who carries out the action with that deep underlying motivation? I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt they're fully apathetic. Do their affections need to catch up? Yes. But are they
Mm.
apathetic? Probably not.
Mm.
And the things that they're doing are the very things that undermine apathy, that keep apathy at bay. The mere fact that they're engaging it. And so let me just loop this back to something we talked about earlier. So we were talking about acedia a little bit. And when you read some of the literature about acedia and how the monks were responsible to sort of overcome acedia, the number one prescription for overcoming acedia, that's not going to be very exciting for people, but the number one motivation was persevere.
Mm.
And so you had like these monks who are sitting in these solitary cells, who are reading, and they're writing things, they're sort of inscribing things, and they have this responsibility to keep these particular hours. And after a while, if you're a human being, like that's just like excruciating. And so all they want to do is leave their cell, right? They just want to get out of that cell and like do something else. They don't want to carry out this responsibility that they sense God has called them to. And the number one counsel, at least from one of the sort of founding fathers of this idea of acedia, the counsel is persevere, and by persevering, you'll be able to persevere. And it sounds ridiculous, but I think that's exactly right. It's carry on doing the things that you know are good and that you're called to, and God will sort of take care of the rest. I'm putting it in my own language. God will take care of the rest. God will keep you in His path, following Him faithfully if you follow Him faithfully.
Persevere so you can persevere.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. So let's take the opposite side of it. So we've talked about the person who is enacting love, not necessarily feeling it. What do you say to the person who's like, I care so deeply, and maybe they're moved to tears over something. But if you were to say, do you give money to that? Do you give time to that? Do you pray for that? Do you, take up any civic or political action about that? And they're like, well, no. Would you say of that person, actually, you don't care?
Yeah.
Mm.
On a deeper level, you don't. Like people are more complicated than sort of binary. Do you care? Don't you care? But
Right.
I think you're right. Like I think that I would say you care at a level, but the level that you care at is very superficial, because care is going to cash out in action. It just does.
Yeah.
It just does. I can't say I care for my family, but my actions are, I'm not going to go to work today. I'm not going to like provide. I'm not going to like ask them how their day was. But I just really love how adorable my kids are. Like they're so cute, and they are cute. I have really cute kids. But I just love them so much, but I don't engage with them in any meaningful sense. I think that's self-deception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Well, I'm going to just tell people who have joined the call that they can put a question in the chat if you have anything that you want to ask. But I have one more question to ask from my list. And Abby is going to man our chat, woman our chat, I shall say. And any other questions that she has. The last one I have is just a personal question, because so much of the work that I've been doing recently has been on rule of life. So I'm curious, like, do you have a rule of life? Do you think that that's a helpful practice when you think about, well, you have to kind of say yes, actually. That's, I mean, I'm not gonna, yeah, if you say no, then no one's going to come to the workshops I'm
Yeah.
offering, Uche.
I don't really believe in this thing called a rule. Just kidding. All right. I don't have like I've never categorized it in the in the that sort of category of rule of life. So I've had a certain number of things that I am committed to in my life, and so
Yeah.
that's my rule of life, right? And so on one level, yeah, I do. So I can, off the top of my head, here are like a number of things that I try to stay steady in, and that I think have helped me with apathy. So regular engagement with the Bible, even when it gets boring. And so I'm always listening to audio Bible, trying to read the Bible, trying to pray the Bible. That's just going to be a roughly daily thing. Okay, so that's baseline. Regular church attendance and service in the life of the church, and especially service in areas that aren't like glamorous. And so not trying to serve in areas that are going to only use my teaching gift or whatever, or my sort of theologian thing, but that are just like engaging with people normally and serving people normally, right? Always going to be committed to regular weekly or bi-weekly conversation with a spiritual friend. And so I have a close friend, and we talk every week or every other week, and it's just a time to talk about, all right, here's stuff that's going on in our lives, but here's what's going on in our souls. And so that's every other week or so. Mentoring. So I'll always make it a part of my life that I'm going to build into someone, typically someone who's in ministry, but someone younger. So typically 10, 15, 20 years younger than me. There's always going to be 2 or 3, 4 people in the pipeline that I'm always trying to build into. In terms of family life, there's always something we're reading at the dinner table. Sometimes we go through a week or 2 span where we don't know what our next read is going to be, but we're reading biographies, we're reading devotional material, we're even reading word of the day kinds of things, trying to keep us talking, but also growing at the dinner table. Weekly-ish coffee dates with my wife. Ish. Emphasis on the ish. All right.
In case she's tuning in.
I can't have her like call me on this one. All right. So weekly-ish, and that's something that I've just failed on in much of our married life until maybe the last year and a half or so. And so, but that's a commitment in terms of staying connected. And I could probably name 3 or 4 other things, but those are the kinds of things that sort of keep my life grounded and rooted. They keep me engaging with the Lord, keep me passionate about the things I should be passionate about and whatnot. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Sounds like a rule of life to me.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you can like be able to, you know what it is, what your primary commitments and values are. So thank you. That was a wonderful window, and just to a little bit of, the person that you are and how God's at work in you. Abby, I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you have for us?
Well, just a reminder, you can drop the questions in the comments, and I'm happy to share those, but I'll start with one of my own. So I'm a mom of 2, soon to be 3 children. I work at a church. I'm interested if you have any thoughts or advice on how to cultivate institutional cultures that work against apathy.
That's a great question.
Wow.
And again, culture meaning like a nuclear family, to what can I do through my vocational work as teaching God's word, drawing people into community to fight apathy.
Yeah, so I think we have to step back and even as church leadership, ask the question. So, what would we identify as the 2 or 3 things that would most would most move our people towards being apathetic? So for instance, when I think about our youth ministry, I'm always going to be against youth events that will have our kids engaging with technology. Not because it's bad, not because I'm a Luddite or whatever. It's just because their whole lives, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day, are them being inundated. Even when they're at school and they're supposed to be doing their work on their computers, like they're doing only Lord knows what, right? And so there's all this inundation with a lack of meaning. And so then we're going to be deliberate, and we're going to say, all right, youth events, we are going to de-technologize, if that's a word, right? We're going to strip them down. Among the, again, I'm thinking among the young people because it seems easiest with them. One of the practices we do is we have this I think it's a morning or it might be a night where we call it like secret church or whatever, and the youth read enormously long stretches of scripture, and they have to stay engaged with reading like chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters of scripture. And again, that's not valuable. That's valuable in and of itself, but what it does is that it combats the kinds of things that make it easy for us to just kind of grow numb. And I think our people are numb. I think they're numb. I think they're numb, whether it's because of political discourse or just the inundation with the meaningless. I think they're numb. And so whatever we're able to do to sort of like address the numbing influences, and sort of help our people to slow down and actually like think and feel in their lives. And so my wife is the women's ministry director at my church, and so one of the events she has is, she just calls it formation days or spiritual formation days, or no, soul care days is what she calls it. And this will be like a 4 or 5 hour stretch of time. The women will either meet at the church or they'll go somewhere nice or whatever. And it's a time for 20 or whatever women to like pause and think and feel and reflect. And so I don't have any sort of silver bullet. I think it's just being able to recognize that our people are starved for meaning. They're starved for a sense of like being able to feel their lives and not just sort of react to their lives or have their lives happen to them. And so whatever we can do to slow things down, to cultivate that kind of thing, I think is massively helpful. Not everyone's going to get on board, but I think you can generate a critical mass of a small percentage of people who are willing to do that kind of work, and I think there could be a rippling effect. Yeah.
Well, I have another question that I'm going to ask as we wait for if anyone else wants to chime in. You write in your book, I'm simply trying to shed light on the fact that we are numb to the meaningful, but often alive to the trivial. And I was wondering then, what ought our relationship to the trivial be? Because I feel like my joy over drinking the perfect cup of tea out of the perfect teacup, like there's a line there where that's like celebrating a gift that got a daily grace of God's. Mm-hmm. But if that could easily also become that comfort could become an idol. And so how do we properly relate to the trivial?
Yeah. So first I wouldn't want to put your tea in the trivial category.
Okay. So
I translated and I made that coffee for myself, and I was like, coffee is not trivial in any way, shape, or form, right?
No,
it's simply not. It's just not very, very important. No, I think enjoying the good gifts of creation, that's just kind of like an assumed thing that Christians need to be really good at. What I have in mind when I think about trivial is like, what do I care what this celebrity tweeted about? You know what I mean? Like what do I care? And what do I even care about what this Christian celebrity tweeted about? It has like no bearing on my existence, and it has no bearing on my family life. It has no bearing on the things that I'm called to do in my immediate environment. It has no bearing. And so in that sense, it's meaningless. It's not ultimately meaningless, but it's relatively meaningless to me. And so then but a lot of our days are spent scrolling through meaninglessness. The TikTok videos, the Instagram feeds, like it's just like it's all meaningless. It's fun, and sometimes we need diversions, and diversions are good for us. But our lives are just diversions with work interspersed. Right. and that seems problematic to me in terms of like, it's not going to cultivate a life of meaning if I'm just spending so much time scrolling through what this funny thing that this person did on Insta or whatever. And so I'm not saying never watch an Instagram thing or a funny SNL clip on YouTube or whatever. I do all those things, but But even I have to catch myself when all I want to do is like go to the next video, then the next video, and then the next video. Then I find all I'm thinking about, honestly, like I found all I'm thinking about is like, that was a really funny sketch. And then I keep on talking about, and then even in the flow of our home life, all I'm doing is like repeating that silly joke all the time. It's until my teenagers are rolling their eyes, I'm like, okay, Dad, we get it. It was funny, you know? But when you think about it, that's the meditation of my heart.
Huh.
It is, right? Because it's being repeated in my heart and my mind all day. And so we have to cultivate a very cautious relationship with the meaningless, so that like the things that we're meditating on aren't trivial.
Mm-hmm. I want to jump in here real fast because I don't think questions come in. And this shouldn't be the last question, because it's just, people don't want to feel that people are imposing like legalistic sanctions on their entertainment, right? But I was so struck by the quote that you included by Tozer. I think it was Tozer, wasn't it Tozer? Was it Tozer, or no, it was oh gosh, what's the other guy's name? No, it was Tozer. I'm pretty sure.
Was it about the great God entertainment? Is that the one you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah.
From the 1950s, when we only had, I don't know, like probably not every home had a TV.
Nope.
Can you just speak very frankly with what should be our sane and healthy relationship to entertainment, especially as it relates to
Yeah, and I'm going to be preaching to myself a little bit here, because I don't know if I've arrived at any sort of like ideal, but the questions I ask myself are both quantity and quality questions, right? So quantity. So I have only a certain number of hours in a day. I know that in those hours in the day, I cannot read all the time. You know, like I'm a slow reader and I get bored reading, you know, and so I can't read all the time. I know that I'm not going to be like engaging in some sort of like woodworking project or whatever. Like, there's a question of like, how am I going to spend my time in a day, right? And my kids feel this, especially during breaks. Like, how am I going to spend my time in the day? And so entertainment-y kinds of things tend to be gap fillers, right? So we have these sort of meaningful things we do, and then we have these still hours. And so then the question is like, how am I going to use those still hours? After the productive things are done, the work things, the home things, the responsibilities are done, how am I going to use the still hours? And so then the question I ask myself is, do I fill every still hour with some kind of amusement? And if I find myself inclined to filling my still hours with amusement, there's something going on there. And I think it's partially me running away from actually thinking and feeling my life. I think that's oftentimes the case. Like I see it where we're not consciously doing this. We're not saying, I don't want to think about my life, let me go watch 4 hours of Netflix. It's we just kind of do it because it's a lot easier than having to like feel the weight of the day that we just had and have to process the day that we just had, and what does that mean, and how do I need to be approaching this intentionally and in a godly way. We just don't want to do that work. That's hard work. And so I think we oftentimes find ourselves doing the default thing, which is very culturally acceptable, which is just watch a lot of stuff, or just kind of sit on the couch and be scrolling for endless, you know, minutes and hours, you know. And so I don't have a strict prescription, other than I think we need to be far less what's the word, I don't want to use a Christian word, I was going to use gracious, but far less give ourselves far less of a pass when it comes to entertainment. I really think we do. I really do think it actually is not the number one thing, but it's one of the main things killing our souls. I really do think it is. I just think it is. And I don't think there's any way of getting around that. I can't mandate like watch this many hours of TV a week or this many hours of scrolling through your phone a week or whatever. But I do think for most of us, it can be significantly less. And then the question is, so then what do I do with that time? Right? Because it's real time. So what do I do with it? What I've been trying to do intentionally now is I will pick up a paper book and not even like my Kindle, not even reading it on my phone, not an audio book. I'm going to pick up a paper book and force myself to like break away from like technology and the distractions that come from that. And I'm just going to try to read a sustained argument for like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something really small. Because I know, even though I'm pretty chastened in terms of like how much TV I watch and how much entertainment, but I still see that my natural inclination when I'm done with my day is I don't want to think, I don't want to engage with any other human beings, I don't want to have to like solve problems. I just want to go numb, and the easiest way to go numb is turn to our entertainment, where God says, no. If when you're weary and you're exhausted, you don't turn to entertainment and amusement per se, right? You turn to these other means that God gives you, whether it's turn to Him in prayer or turn to other people, whatever it might be. But you turn to these places that are actually meant to bring life and not meant to just sort of distract you until you are tired enough to fall asleep.
Mm. You heard it here, people. Mind your entertainment, right? Mind your entertainment. Yeah, it was interesting because when I was reading that from Tozer in the 1950s, I was thinking about Wheaton. We have a Wheaton connection. I was thinking about the way the pledge has evolved over the years and how there used to be restrictions on like playing cards and I mean, not just, not just dancing and drinking alcohol, but, forms of entertainment, which I think Christians rightfully said, wait, maybe we should kind of be mindful of our diversions because what are we diverting our attention from? And I remember doing a project for, I don't know, history of education or something on the pledge and kind of like tracking all those changes and thinking like, whew, thank God, we're not as legalistic as those earlier generations. And I'm starting to think, okay, maybe, I mean, there's probably a both and, right? I mean, there was probably some legalism involved, and there was probably a lot of great wisdom to say, don't sit around and play cards all the time.
Yeah.
Go to prayer meeting.
Yeah. No,
I'm just imagining the day when the cards were the problem.
Right.
Can you imagine? I know.
Now I'd be like, play cards all you
play
want.
cards, exactly. Play whatever you want
away,
to do with your
people.
cards.
You go away.
Yeah.
And I don't have any sort of like, I wish I had some sort of like research or empirical sort of evidence on this, but I do think there are generational differences. I do think there was a generation that was probably a little more serious. Now this doesn't mean that like there wasn't like a ton of nominal Christianity in the 50s and 60s or something like that. There was. The numbers aren't that much different actually. But for those who were trying to walk the Christian life, I think that group of people, and I think it's probably the same percentage of people, let's say 25% of people who are trying to walk the Christian life in the 50s and in the 2020s, I think the way that they approach their Christian lives is different. I think there was a certain kind of seriousness that was wedded to legalism maybe, but there's a certain kind of seriousness and sort of focus that I think is different now. I think we allow ourselves a lot more amusements, and I think oftentimes that's packaged in terms of we don't want to be legalistic or we don't want to be moralistic. And we don't want to have this strict category of like there's like worldly people and then Christians, but I think that category of like there's a way to be worldly that's just not really helpful for the Christian, and I think it's a category that needs to be retained, that you can be approaching your Christian life in a way that is largely just sort of like it's worldly in the sense of the things you're going to talk about in your free time. The things you're going to be talking about with your friends are almost always going to be amusements. And that to me seems strange for the Christian. Like, I'm not saying we're always talking about our prayer life, but if I'm never talking about my prayer life, or if I'm never talking about the things that I'm learning, or if I'm never talking about the struggles in my soul, or if I'm never talking about these things that are that define us, if I'm never talking about these things, but like every time I get together with somebody, I'm talking about Manchester United, and I'm talking about it with like zeal, soccer, yes. I'm talking about the Warriors, and I'm talking about it with passion. There's something going on that I think is unique and problematic, and I think we allow ourselves more of that now than probably would have been the case generations ago.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially as you read biography. you know,
Yeah.
you can just see those differences.
Yeah.
I wonder, I was just looking, Abby, do we have anything else in the chat? I want to be mindful of Uche's time. So
we did have one question come in from Marnie, and she says, I keep circling back to this tension. And sorry, let me start over. I keep circling back to this tension in the reality of loving Jesus and simply being okay with being apathetic. And Marnie, are you talking about how do we live with that tension and move from it?
Oh, I think
no, you're fine. You're on mute, Marnie. If you feel free to drop more thoughts.
I wonder if it, well, we'll just see what she says. I don't want to speculate. Was it there? And we can't sit. Oh,
there we go.
Oh, ladies at church, like what women are ready for, interested in. Like there's a way in which there might be some women who would say, I really love Jesus, and yet I don't really have a passion or a desire to learn. Like I'm actually kind of okay to be apathetic. Is that what you're saying, Marnie? Oh, I see. You know, like how do you drive people? I guess the question of, yeah, go ahead, Abby. You want to phrase that?
I was just going to say, how do you cultivate that culture that's excited to understand and know the things of God versus staying at the surface and keeping it easy?
Yeah. Yeah. So my first thought is, I don't know. This is a conversation that, no, really, it is a conversation my wife and I have all the time, even as it applies to things related to women's ministry. So there are certain folks, for instance, I'll talk about Bible study. Certain folks who really just want, like, give me the answers. Because that's just how it was done. Like, so you're not there to discuss and wrestle with the text or whatever. You're there to, like, kind of, sit there and someone gives you the answers, and then you move on with your life. You check the box. You've done your spiritual work for the day, that kind of thing. What do you do with those people? I honestly don't know. How do you help someone who's been in the church environment and has been around the Bible and has been around Christians of various stripes? How do you help them to become sort of like those who have an internal drive to be a learner, to be a disciple?
Yeah.
That is a question that I think goes beyond just our ability to cultivate something. I think, yes, you surround these people with people who are patterning a different kind of life, the life of growth, a life of learning, a life of fullness, a life of joy, a life of friendships and relationships, a life of, like, deepening understanding of the scriptures. Surround them with those people, but yet still, you have to be a realist, and that some folks will simply not catch on, because that's just not where they're at. And so this may sound defeatist or fatalistic. I think at the end of the day, our calling in those settings with people that feel impossible to move is, all we do is we give them a vision for what it is by embodying that vision, and then we pray, like anything, that God would light a fire under either one or two of them, and that would spark a little bit more of an awakening among the others. I really wish there was some kind of, like, magical scholarly solution to it. I think it's the hearts of people, and people's hearts are moved by the Spirit in the context of relationships that are built around the word, and so I think as those things are happening, God can do a good work, but it's really the Spirit that's going to be doing that work.
Well, this has been really a fantastic conversation. Absolutely everything that I thought it would be, because I think your book is really helpful, needed. Like absolutely everybody needs to put it on their list. Overcoming Apathy, Gospel Hope for Those Who Struggle to Care. Uche, it's been amazing to talk to you. I want to keep talking and, but I'm sure that probably in your unwritten rule of life, you have to like go home.
Yeah, dinner and those kinds of things are always important for some reason. So yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. You really, I think, served our audience well, and we're really thankful.
Well, thanks for having me on, and you're a great interviewer, by the way. So I want you to know that you're an excellent interviewer. So
Oh, well, thank you.
keep it up. Keep it up.
Okay,
Anyway,
thanks. I hope to do
it was a joy
that.
to be with you. Yeah, it was a joy to be with you.
Okay, take
Yeah.
care.
All right.
Thank
Take
you
care.
guys. Everybody
All
else,
right.
thank you so much for
Bye, everyone.
joining. Take care, Uche, and we'll make sure that the recording is available for those of you who have watched. And if you're a paid subscriber, if you're a Rule of Life participant, you'll be able to see this later. Thanks so much. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.